Hey everyone! So today's podcast episode will be discussing the falsely convicted Malcolm Alexander.
He was convicted with sexual assault, charged with aggravated rape, and sentenced with life without parole.
The crime was based in Louisiana and it happened on November 8th, 1979. He was convicted on November 5th, 1980, and he was not released from prison until January 30th, 2018.
The defendant, Malcolm, he was a 20-year-old African American, and the victim was a 39-year-old Caucasian woman.
This case consisted of false DNA evidence that the Jefferson Parish Sheriff's Office crime lab had obtained. Instead of finding the true criminal, the victim gave the police his name because she had prior relations to Alexander by asking him for money prior that day.
Her assailant was also African American, and he held her at gunpoint in a dark bathroom in the back of the store where she worked, and then raped her. Her view of his face was extremely limited due to the lack of sight in the dimmed room, but she managed to make out what she could.
The police then conducted a lineup of possible suspects to put it in front of the victim to see if she could recognize any. Alexander's photo was the only one shown to the victim. She saw his photo and it was recorded that she was 98% sure that he was her assailant.
And so by that conclusion, she then had went and testified in trial that she was absolutely certain that it was Alexander who raped her, but it was not.
With the victim's absolute statement being said, there was then no more discussion to even try to defend Alexander. His unreliable attorney, Joseph Tosh, failed to make a closing statement, and it was only 4 pages out of 87 pages of transcript. The attorney also promised to file an appeal on the verdict, and he never did.
That then concluded his trial, and it sentenced him with a life without parole.
So when Alexander was released in 2018, he still had to plead guilty when leaving the prison. But back in 1996, he had written to the Innocent Project in hopes of DNA exonerating him. Unfortunately, the actual DNA evidence from the assailant was a semen-infested towel and was destroyed 4 years after his conviction and ability to find the actual assailant.
That still did not stop Alexander. In 2013, hair evidence was recovered from the crime scene and was sent to the Innocent Project in New Orleans crime lab to identify the DNA. 3 crime scene hairs were gathered and all matched one another, as well as not matching Alexander, so that proved that he was not guilty, and they did not match the victim either. That being said, the district attorney's office dismissed the indictment in court today.
A major role for this case and impact on the community that it had was how any man of color could have been accused as the culprit in this crime. It didn't matter if they were the one who had done the crime or if they were the one who was sentenced to death if the victim had enough passion and emotion to the case to where the jury would choose her sympathy over the truth. This could work to convict anyone in this position today or in the past.
It has also been stated that this trial only took 1 day, and there was no real evidence that confirmed it was Malcolm who committed the crime, yet he was still charged.
This case, along with so many others, is a great example on how corrupt and unjust the criminal system can be and how it could be improved for not only Alexander's life, but of the families involved as well.
In my opinion, this case is shocking to me how the justice system is so failed. There was no evidence toward Malcolm, yet the court took the easy way out and blamed an innocent man. I think that changes need to be made so that no other life-changing convictions will happen to any other innocent person.
I think this case has some obvious misconduct in detectives' and policemen's parts, and we see the mistakes that were blatantly made, and I think it's ridiculous that someone could serve almost 4 decades, 38 years for a crime that they did not commit. On the other hand, this isn't a normal case. It's a case where the victim is going to be filled with trauma throughout her whole entire life. So there is sympathy on both parts.
And a question that I keep coming back to with this case is how this case is very sympathetic, and not only towards Alexander and the victim, but I also feel sympathy towards the friends and family that were involved in this case and had to endure this emotional roller coaster of a trial. I myself am even appalled that he was convicted with no other evidence than the words of the victim herself, and no additional airtight evidence that he was her assailant or even being present at the crime scene at all.
After reading about this crime, I still have the question of who is the actual true assailant in this crime.
And, you say that makes me think, were there multiple people involved? Was it a one-person case? We'll never really know, but I just want to know what the guilty party was thinking and if they were alone in this action.
And that's exactly what I think, too. And I'm still wondering at how a jury and judge would sentence him as guilty, even with no other evidence than the words of the victim, and still base their decisions on her knowledge of the crime without further investigation to this. In comparison to this case, I think it's very similar to the Crucible in the sense that Tituba, the slave, was also wrongfully convicted from the false witchcraft accusations Abigail made on her.
Abigail in the Crucible was very similar to the victim in Malcolm's case. They both decided to place the blame on people that they knew were not guilty of the crime committed. Abigail and the victim did this for their own advantage, and the judges in both cases had sympathy for the victims and therefore convicted the accused quickly to move on to the next case.
I think it's a classic case of human nature. People have high emotions and let outlying factors cloud their judgment, and that's a completely normal thing, but at the same time it can at times become a risk to other people. And I think it's really easy to point the finger of blame at someone else, just like Abigail did. She let her emotions cloud her judgment, and she was very quick to put a lot of people in danger. Now, Abigail was, a little bit more crazy, but this woman in real life, she had a horrible thing to happen to her, and she was doing the best that she could to cope with it and deal with it. And so it's definitely similar to the Crucible in ways of high emotion and never really knowing if you're wrong in your accusation or not.
Same with that. I think from my point of view in comparison to both Alexander's case and the Crucible, they are both motivated with so much emotion and not really any logic or just things of that sort. They both are flooded with so much emotion that they had to find someone to blame, even if it wasn't the most logical decision or if it was someone that even had no part in the situation at all. The judgment involved in these situations are blinded by their need to conform to the truth and how they just gave an answer to what they think and they didn't want to believe in it, so they just had to face the truth and further think about the situation so that they could escape this.
Okay, thank you for listening to today's podcast about Malcolm Alexander.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you
for listening.